So today, what I had in mind, unless you two have anything else you want to learn, make it known. But what I had in mind was I wrote these 7 widgets when I started teaching. Well, yeah, a couple months into teaching, to teach people React. So it was with the curriculum that I had to teach at the time, jumped right into like bigger projects, and it was a lot harder for people to learn the basic concepts that underlaid that the underlying concepts of React, and they just were overwhelmed by all this jumping around and that kind of thing. So I wrote these widgets in order to teach those underlying concepts. So I am a firm believer that if you're able to build these 7 widgets, there might actually be 8 now. I might have come up with some other ones since then. But if you can build these yourself, then you know how to write React code, and all you have to be able to do is scale up from that knowledge that you already have. So for a list of these, they're right here. So I'm going to put these in here as comments. There we go. So here are how many are there? There are 7. Awesome. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to build a counter, a toggle feature, a font sizer, an alignment button, a clock, a color changer, and then sliders that will change the color. So counter, if you have been on my channel since the beginning, we did build the counter before, but we're going to do it again. So let's just get started with that. So the first thing that we need to do is build out the view, the front end, what we're actually looking at. So we'll make an h1 tag here that will say 0, because that's where our count starts, right? So we have that, and then we need a button. Inside of that button, we will put an add. So the title of this button will be add. And then another button that will be sub. Like that. So now we have the beginning of our count and then a way of adding and subtracting. So now what we need to do is to create a value that will be able to track and change. So the way we do that is through something called state. This syntax, we create a variable, wrap it in these curly braces, not curly braces, but just brackets. And in there, we give it 2 different arguments. The first is the piece of state, which is the variable we want to keep track of. So we'll call that count, because we want to keep track of a count. And then the second variable is a function that we'll use to update that count. So we'll call that setCount. We then set that equal to something called react.useState, and that is a React hook. So it will allow us to keep track of these things. You pass to useState, you pass to that the initial value that you want on the screen. So right now, count, this word count represents 0. So we can just put curly braces here and type count. And these curly braces tell the program that we're going to put a variable in here. It's not a hard-coded value anymore. We're actually referring to something, so you should look for that something. But count is then referring to this, which is referring to this 0. And you can see over here it still says 0. You might have seen it flash. If I change this to anything else, it'll be referenced on the screen. So if we put zeros there, we can now use setCount to change that value. And we want it to change when a button is pressed. So when the add button is pressed, we want count to go up. So we use props, use this onClick prop that will tell this button, anytime you're clicked, you need to do this action. We put that inside of an arrow function, and we call setCount. And then inside of these parentheses, we have to pass what we want to happen to that count, right? So we want count to go up by 1, right? So just count plus 1, easy peasy. So now once I click add, it goes up. Awesome. So now we have that going up, but we need it to come back down. So as a quick challenge, figure out how you can make the sub button, when it's clicked, subtract from the count. And if anyone wants to try that, that's great. I need to go to the bathroom, so I'll be right back. Sorry about that. All right, let's get back to it. So, if you didn't figure it out, that is okay, but it's actually just as simple as taking this, plopping it in here, then instead of adding, we just subtract. And just like that, we have a counter. Now this is super cool. We can put any integer or anything at all we want in here, and that will change by that value. So if I do plus 10, it'll go up by 10, but it'll still go down by 1. So that's a super easy counter. And this is like super generic. Like anyone who teaches you React will be like, yeah, you need to build a counter at some point in your life. And I remember when I figured this out for the first time, it was awesome. It made me really happy that I was able to press a button and something happened on screen. All right, so now if we can build another widget. The next one we're going to do is a toggle, right? Next one we're going to build is a toggle. So this file is going to get kind of crowded if we build all these in the same file. So this is another good thing to learn in React is how to extract complexity. So all we have to do is come over here to our source folder, create a file. We'll call this counter.js. And then we're just going to copy over. We're going to remove all this from there. And then in counter, we're going to write that same component and just put it in here so that we can call it elsewhere. So first thing, we just need to import React from React. And then down here, we should just have to write a function called counter. Put those parentheses there because it's a function, and then return that. We'll wrap it all in a div, paste that in, and then close off that div. When we hit save, it'll make it look good for us. So now we need to export default counter, and this just makes it available in other files. So we got that. Now we need to import it over here. So import capital counter from the file of counter. If you're confused by this dot slash, this dot just means in the current directory, so in the source directory, look for a file called counter, which is where that thing is stored. And then we have this counter is actually referring to this function specifically. So we'll pull it in. So that's just pulls in that function, and then we can call that function by wrapping it in these angle brackets, just like that. So now we're having a state where count is not defined, and that's because we didn't put this bad boy in that file. So we just need to take that out of there and make sure that it's underneath the function but before the return. And now that should work. Refresh. Sometimes this, there we go. Sometimes this program code sandbox is kind of slow, but now you can see that it's working the same because we've encapsulated all that behavior in this function and then we just called it. So now this one word represents that all that work we did, and we can call it as many times as we want. So we can be like We can do 2 of them. And they'll be completely independent of each other. So if I want that one to go up and that one to go down, it doesn't matter. They're completely independent. We wrote it once, but we can have it as many times as we want if we just keep calling it. So there we go. There is 1. So I'm going to take that class name out because that'll take the styles away. So we'll just push it up against the left there. And now I'm going to put something called an HR tag. And that just puts that gray line across the bottom, and that'll give us a good separation so we know what we're building. Okay, so next we're going to build this toggle feature. And what that toggle is going to do, it's going to have, it's actually going to have 2 buttons. Toggle styles. I feel like I remember I had one more. Did I just forget that one? Counter toggle. No, it's not here, but I remember having it. So maybe we'll build both of them. Okay. So toggle. Yeah. So we'll just do that one. So we're going to go ahead and just create our own file for it. Oh, right. Show hide.js. We'll call it show hide.js because this is the kind of toggle we're going to do first. So we're going to have a message and then a button that will make it disappear or reappear. Okay. So to create a React component, we import React from React like that. And then we just write a function, right? So you can write functions like this, or you can just use arrow functions. I always use arrow functions, so I'm going to start using arrow functions here. So const show hide will take in no parameters but that. So this and that are the same thing. They're just, it's a different syntax with very minimal differences that aren't important right now. But I just think it looks better, so I write it this way. Okay, so show hide. First thing we need is our UI. So let's build out that UI first. We'll put it in a div. And down here we need our message. So let's use an h1 tag and we'll just write message for now. Then we'll make a button that says show for now. And make sure that that's a closing tag. If we save that, nothing's coming up on the screen, and that's for 2 reasons. First, we're not exporting it, so we need to export default show hide. And then we need to import it here, just like we did there. So instead of counter, we'll import show hide from /show hide like that. And then right in this empty space, we will call that just like we did the other one. And that should bring it up on the screen. So that's what it should look like for now. So now that button isn't doing anything right now. So there's 2 things we need to do. We need to make a piece of state. So this will be our message. And, oh, no, we won't call it message. We'll call it show and set show. React.useState. Because we don't want to change the message. We just want to change if it's on the screen or not. So we're going to use something called a Boolean. Yeah. And a Boolean is a true or false value. So true, false, 0, 1, yes, no, the language of computers. And so if this Boolean show is true, we want it to show on the screen, which is why we named it show. If it's false, we want it to hide. So what we can do is wrap this in curly braces, and we can use something called a logical operator. So we can do show and ampersand, message, or let's put a message that makes sense. Hello, right? So if show is true, this is what's called a logical operator. If show is true, hello will appear. If not, you can see there's nothing on there. So since this is false, show is false, so it's false here as well. And that means nothing is appearing on screen. But if I come up here and I change it to true, it'll appear. Cool, huh? But it's not very user-friendly because our user has to go in and change the code in order to see it. So let's give them a button to be able to do that. So we have the button already, we just need to make an on-click. So we can create an on-click, call setShow, and set it to true when the button is pressed. So that'll simply make it appear. But what if I'm the user, I don't have enough room on my screen, I wish I could hide some of this data, right? But if I press it again, it's still there. So there's no way of making it disappear. So what we can do is use this operator. It's called a bang. It's just an exclamation point, but it means the opposite. So if I want to set it to the opposite of show. So if show is false, it'll set it to true. And if show is true, we can set it to false. And so that will toggle back and forth. I don't like how it moves up and down, so I'm just going to put the button up here instead. And then that'll toggle on and off. But it doesn't really make sense when we're showing, it doesn't make sense for the button to say show, right? We want it to say hide when the hello is on the screen, right? So we can use something called a ternary operator. So if show is true, we ask that question with a question mark. If show is true, we want this button to say hide, right? Because if show is true, then the message is on the screen and we need a button to hide it. Otherwise, we show otherwise with the colon. We want it to be show. So if it's showing, the button will say hide. If it's hiding, the button will say show. So if we, oh, did I get it backwards? Yeah, no, I got it. So it's not there. It says show. It is there. It says hide. And that'll go back and forth just like that. Sweet, huh? These two are very common and very useful inside of React. I guess in JavaScript in general, but I use this all the time and this all the time. This is a classic if-else statement, but in a very simple one-line fashion, and it can be pretty confusing, but I just read it like a sentence. So it's like, show, yes, no, right? So if show is yes, then hide. If show is no, then show. That made sense. That could be confusing because of the way we named it, but you just got to remember that this show is referring to this piece of state up here. So now we have that awesome toggle feature, and we're using the toggle in two different places to decide what's on the screen. Pretty sweet, huh? All right, we got to get moving if we're going to get through all these. So next, what do we have? A font sizer. This one's super fun. I remember a student actually figured this one out before me and taught me how to do it. Fontsizer.js. But he did it in vanilla JavaScript, and so I just made it in React instead. Import React from React. And what's great about this is that actually gives you a lot of practice in creating components, which is something the syntax of creating a component can be pretty confusing for beginners, and that's totally okay. So we'll do the exact same thing we did, just with a font sizer name instead. And then we want this to be a div again. And that. And then let's just do an H1 that will say 20 for now. And just to make sure that it's working and we're not breaking anything. Cool. That's good. Now we just need to export default font sizer as we do. And then we need to import it from somewhere else. So right here, we will import font sizer from dot slash font sizer, and then we'll put a horizontal rule there and call font sizer. Follow the same pattern that we have the entire time. So you see we have that 20, which we put right here, and we're chilling. So font sizes are measured in pixels. So we want this to say 20 pixels at the end of the day. And then we're going to put the buttons above this, because this right here, I guess it actually has to be a p tag, right? It has to be a p tag because h1s don't like being sized. So a p tag will actually grow and shrink as we need it. So then we need 2 buttons, one for grow and one for shrink, right? So this will be grow. And then this will be shrink, shrinky-dink button. There we go. We got them on there. Now we need a piece of state, and that state will represent our font size at the end of the day. So we will do const font size, or we'll just call it size to keep it more simple, and set size. So you can see that I am using the same pattern. Oh, not that. Use state size. See that I'm using the same pattern over and over again with the piece of state and then set that piece of state. This is the accepted pattern used in React. We should always just name the function to update the piece of state, that piece of state with the word set in front of it, because it's going to do a very specific job. So I want my default font size to be 20. That's why I named that 20. But the way we can style here is we use a prop called style, and then we have to give that a object. So an object is key value pairs, and JavaScript by React allows us to style components in here, so we can change the font size, and we can set that to size. But it has to be a string like 20 pixels, like that. And so you can see here, if we do that, you can see it grew. If I change it, it'll be bigger, and so on and so forth. But, there we go. So I want the user to be able to change this. So we can use something called a template string, and we can do something like this. And this allows us to put variables inside of strings. So we'll say size and then pixels. And so now it's listening to this piece of state, and if I change it, it'll change to whatever that piece of state is. But so now all we have to do is give these buttons the ability to grow and shrink this piece of state. So this is super similar to our counter that we did earlier, but we're just dealing with a bit of an extra step. So set size to whatever size is plus, let's go up by 5, because I think that'll be, I don't want to go up by 1 pixel every time. That'll be silly. So then we can just copy this bad boy, just like we did with our counter, put it there, and then subtract 5 right from there. So now if we grow and shrink that, it'll grow and shrink the pixel sizes. Awesome. But this is kind of silly that it says 20 pixels, even if it's bigger than that, right? So I want this right here to reflect the size of the pixels. So whatever pixels, whatever size it is, I want it to say what size it is, so I can get used to just what pixel sizes mean, I guess. So all we can do is wrap it in curly braces, input that piece of state. You can see it's 35 right now, and then we can just type pixels right after it, and it'll treat that like a normal string. So now when we grow it, it goes up by 5 every time and back down, and we can size our anything we put there. So you could, this is something you could wrap like an entire, like if we wanted to, we could do this sentence is blank pixels big. And then that'll just change with the size, all we want. Awesome. I want to keep it simple though, so we'll just put that all back to just the pixels like that. Awesome, we're good, we're chilling. Cool. So that is our font sizer. What's next? We got our font sizer. We want to toggle styles. So this is like a classic alignment kind of thing. So you know how when you're doing a Word document or something, you can press like align left, align right, align center. We're gonna do that now. We're gonna show how that is taken care of. So let's just create a new file. Let's do alignme.js. We'll call it that. We'll import React from React. We will create the align.me function. Align.me function. Boop, beep, bop, beep. It will return a div. Oops. And that div, for now, we'll just have an h1 in it that says align.me so that we can deal with that. Awesome. So it's not on the screen because we didn't export it. Export default align.me. Beautiful. Then in the app, we will come here. We will import align.me from /align.me, and then we'll put another HR just to separate them so our eyes aren't mistaken, and then we'll call it just like we called everything else, and align.me pops up. Beautiful. All caps is kind of abrasive, so I'm just going to change it to align.me like that. Cool. So now we just need 3 buttons. One button will align it to the left, one to the right, and one to the center, right? So let's do these buttons. This will just say left. Pretty clever, I know. And then I'm just going to copy paste them a couple times. Change this to center. Change this to right. Beautiful. Then we need the piece of state, right? So the state we're going to keep track of is the alignment. So we can do const alignment and then set alignment, and that will be react.use state, and the default will be left, even though the default by default is already left, but it'll just help us to know what the default is more specifically. So then we just put styles on here, and we can just say something like text align, and then we just set that to what alignment is. So now let's see if that works. If we do text align center, that should move it to the center. Good. And text align right will move it over to the right. But left is where we want to be. So you can probably see that I'm following the same pattern every time I'm writing something. I create the UI, then I create the piece of state, then I create the functions that will actually change that piece of state. And so those 3 steps are something that I follow every single day. So I always just create the UI, I create the logic or the ability, not the ability, but the behind the scenes business logic that will handle that, or the pieces of state. And then I give the user the ability to affect those pieces of state. So all these on clicks are going to be super similar. All we're going to do is call set alignment, and we're going to pass in what we want to change when that happens. So that one, we want it to align left. This one, we want it to align center. And then this one, we want it to align right. And bada bing, bada boom. Uh-oh. Do we have server issues? Okay, it looks like we're good. So now if I click it, we should just align it. And there you go. We can align our own text now. Isn't that sweet? Awesome. So there's the align me. Let's go back and see what's next. A clock. Okay, so this gets a little intense. These next three are a bit more crazy, but they teach you valuable things that are important to know for React development. So let's just create a new file. Let's call it clock.js. We gotta get moving. Import React from React, and then const clock. That's the name of my component. Return a div there, a div there, and then inside of here we'll just do h1, and here's the clock. That's just to make sure that it'll be working. I always like to check every step of the way to make sure that it's working. So then here we will import clock from /clock. Let's follow that same pattern. We'll put that HR so we don't confuse anyone, and write the clock in. There we go. So we know that it's working because it's on the screen exactly how we'd like to see it. So all this is going to do, if you see on the top right where my time is up here, that's what this is going to look like. It's going to be ticking along with the real time. So the first thing we want is just an h1 that will hold the time, and so we're there. We got that. Now what we need is the piece of state. That'll be time and set time. react.useState, and by default it'll be set to a new date object. This is a built-in object and constructor that's in the JavaScript language that helps us deal with time. If we could look at this, you'd see that there's a bunch of different functions and attributes that allow us to manipulate the time in there and just be able to view the time in a different way, like the date and the time. So now now time will represent a crazy object. See how objects are now not valid as a React child. You can't render objects in React. But you can see this is what is there. And if you look at that and then look at my clock, you can see that's the exact same thing. But if we do .to locale time string, we do that, you can see this is the time. But it's not moving like it should. It just, when the component loaded up, that's just what time it was, so it shows that time. So now we need to be able to set the time every second, or have it update so that it looks like it's ticking, right? And if you want things to automatically happen inside of React apps, you use things called effects. Effects are things that don't happen from user input, but just need to happen either when certain things change or when certain things happen in the life cycle of the application. So we do that by calling react.useEffect, and then inside of there we put a function. Now right after that function, but before that parenthesis, we need to put these brackets. These brackets will signify that we want this function, whatever's in here, we want this function to run when this component specifically goes onto the screen, when it mounts. That's called the mounting process. So there's a couple things we need to do. The first thing is to set an interval. This is something in JavaScript that allows us to run a certain function every time a certain amount of time passes. So the first argument to set an interval is the function to run. So I want it to run set time, and I want it to just set time to a new date object. Then the second the second argument is the amount of time you want to pass before that's run. So it sets an interval, which is why it's named set interval. So every 1,000 milliseconds, it'll run this function. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 full second. So it'll look like every second this is just ticking, but it's actually being updated. Now what we have to do is put this inside of a variable. So we'll just call it interval equals set interval. Then we need to be able to tell the computer to stop this interval if this component ever goes off the screen. So we can do that by returning a function from this function that clears the interval, and then we pass in whatever interval we want to clear. So that's the interval we want to clear. Let's see if that's all we have to do. Voila, there it is. Okay, so interesting thing about this, if we take this out, it'll still work. It doesn't need this per se, especially on a simple application like this. But let's say that you had this on a page of your website, and a user clicked away from that page and then went back to that page. Since we told this function to run every time that component comes onto the screen, it will keep running this interval every time it goes onto the screen. So if you have a silly user that has to keep clicking back and forth between pages, eventually you'll set so many intervals inside of their computer that it'll crash. And that's called a memory leak. So you're creating more memory usage than you're intending, and that's a big no. So inside of this function, we have to clean that up. This is called a cleanup function. So this line of code, anytime that component leaves the screen, it'll clear that interval off, and when they come back to it, it'll just create a new interval based on when they started. So this is super important to have if you're setting something inside of internal memory like that. Internal memory? Did I say eternal memory? So there we go. We have our clock, and you can see it's right on time with our current clock up there. Pretty cool, huh? I'm a big fan of that one. That one was crazy to figure out the first time, years ago by now, but I remember it being super hard to figure out. Okay, let's go back to app. We have two more. The first one is change color. This one's a super fun one, so I'm excited. Change color.js. We will import React. From React, we will create a component called change color. It won't take any arguments, but it will return a div. And inside of that, we will have an h1 that will just say the color that it will be, whatever it may be. So if you're a little slower making these components, don't worry. It's taken me a long time to be able to just muscle memory my way into these things. All right, so let's make sure that's working by going back to our app, importing change color from change color. Down here, we put our horizontal rule, just like that, and change color right there. So we should just see black. Perfect. We're doing good. So let's go back to change color and let's get this party started. So the first thing we want is an input. So this is a value. It will have type text because we want it to be a text input. And then we'll give it a placeholder of color because we're going to input a color. There you go. And then we're going to put another button. Another button there. And, oh, I guess this just needs to be, we'll call it change, because that's the button we'll press to change the color. Simple enough. So now we need a piece of state that will represent that color, right? So we'll just do const color and set color. Boom. And by default, it'll just be black, right? So now let's make sure that this is all, oh, I need to do react.useState. So now in the H1, we want it to render the color that it will be. So it's still working. But then in style, we need to give it the color property. And then it'll keep track of our piece of state color. Now this is a super cool trick. If you're inside of an object in JavaScript and your key and your value separated by this colon is the same, you only have to write it once. And the program will understand, or JavaScript will understand, that the key and value just have the same name. All right, so now let's change this to blue. And it changes what color it is and what's on the screen, right? So now we need another piece of state. That piece of state will be our text. And it'll be called set text there. So this is something called two-way binding. We have to be able to bind this piece of state to this input and this input to this piece of state both ways. So we do that by giving it a value. That value will be whatever text is. So now this piece of state is bound to this input. But by binding this input to the piece of state, we can do an onChange instead of an onClick, call set text, right? So if we did this right, if I type blue, oops, we're breaking. Oh yeah, that's right. So this is pretty confusing, but anytime anything happens on your screen, an event is passed to where that changes. That event has, so this is the event that's automatically passed in there. It's a huge object that is handled by the browser already. But inside of that event, it has a target value. So event.target is our text input. And then the value, since the value here, you can see the value here, right? So value here and value here reference the same text. So now this is connected to the state, and the state is connected to it through those two props. So now, if I refresh it, I should be able to type blue. So I'm typing in there fine. Then I press change. All right, I haven't put anything on the button yet. So on the button, we want on click there, we want to set color to whatever text is at that moment, right? Because text is keeping track of what's in the input box, but color is keeping track of what color it is. So at this moment, text is blue. I click change and it changes. Awesome. So we can also do yellow. Click change and it changes to yellow, green, bop, perfect. It also will accept any color or any color at all that you could use inside of HTML. So a hexadecimal color, 00CB78 is this light green color. So that works. Let's see. FF 000 is black, so that works. And all that good stuff. Awesome. So there we go. We have that. So now we can change and see any color we want. And it's also cool because if you don't understand hexadecimals at all, you can just type in random things and see if it's type in 6 random things and see if it is a color. If it comes back black, it's not a color. So there we go. So EE00FF is this cool like magenta purple. Cool, huh? And then you can just take that and plug it into wherever you want and change colors. So let's just put it back to black for now. Cool. So I don't think I explained onChange very well. OnChange is a function that's called anytime something changes in this input. So anywhere you have an onChange, that function will be called anytime something changes. So this is being called anytime the value in here changes. So every button click inside of here calls onChange. OnClick is the same kind of thing. These are both events, but onClick only happens once when you actually click the button, right? Cool. So we got that. So I think we're on our last one, which is color sliders. Awesome. So I don't think I've ever actually built this one before. I just came up with the idea. I did build it in React Native, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal to do. But if we do color slider.js, and what this is going to be is an RGB based color slider that will give you the ability to put in a certain amount of red, green, and blue, and then it'll give you the color that is. So this might take a while, a little longer than the other ones at least, but I think it'll be really cool. Const color slider, return, put a div in here, and then H1 colors, and that's just to check to make sure it's working, and then we'll export default color slider. Almost good. And then in app we'll put color slider from /color slider, just like that, and we will put our HR as we do and call our color slider there. Awesome. So it's bringing up that colors, so we know we're doing good. So the first thing we need in here is just an empty div that will be the color of whatever it is. So right now we'll just give it a height of 50 pixels, a width of 100 pixels, and a background color of black, just so what am I missing? Am I missing something? Oh, I didn't put a comma here. There we go. So we have this box of black, and that'll change depending on our color. So then default HTML gives us a slider, I think. I'm going to have to see how we use that though. HTML slider. How to create range sliders. Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that's what we want. Create a range slider. Oh, so it's an input type of range, and then we give it a min and a max and the current value. And then I think we'll be giving it like an onChange value as well. So we're just going to copy this over and make sure we get it right. Bop. Awesome. So it's of type range. The value is 50. Awesome. It goes there. But we can't change it because the value is hard-coded. So all we're going to do is connect this to a piece of state, change these. So the min is actually going to be 0 because an RGB color uses red, green, and blue with each value being represented by a single bit or a single byte. And so it'll be a value from 0 to 255. So the max will be 255 and the min will be 0. So now our value, this is going to represent the red. So this will be how much red we have in here. And set red will be our function. That's a funny setting function. Use state, just like that. And by default, I guess we should just set it to 0 by default, right? And our value here will now be red. Okay? So if we let that there we go. So now we should be able to slide it up and down. Oh no, we need to do an onChange method that, will, so this will give us an event as well. So you saw on the other one that I used the word event. You can also just use the letter E or anything you want. I usually just use the letter E because it's pretty obvious what it is after you've used it as much as I have. So event.target.value, the same thing we did before, because the value is represented right here, right? So now with those things in place, it fixes it a little bit for us, and we should be able to drag it. Awesome. We can drag it up and down. So the main thing, so now what we want is to be able to have a color, a background color that will match the values down here. So we can do that simply by typing RGB with parentheses, and this will create an RGB color for us. But we need to be able to put variables in there that be our state variables. So we'll make it a templated string, and inside of here we'll put red. And then we'll fill these other things in with our green and our blue eventually. But for right now, I'm just going to make sure that the red is working. So if we did this right, it should just get more and more red as we move this up. Ready? Woohoo! We did it. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Very proud of that. So now we just need to create 2 more pieces of state, one for green and one for blue, and then pass those into here and create the inputs to control those. So I'm going to start off with the inputs. These are all going to be the same. So I'm just going to copy it twice, but instead here, the value here is going to be green. The value here is going to be blue. We're going to have errors over there because we haven't created everything yet, but that's okay. Then this is going to be set green and set blue, just like that. And then we just need to create those pieces of state. So const green set green equals react.useState, and that default will be 0. And then do the same thing for blue. Blue set blue react.useState, and that'll also be set to 0 initially. Okay, I think that'll do it. So you can see we have these 3 different ones. It'd be better if they were stacked on top of each other, but whatever. So red, let's do like half red, a little bit of blue, and a lot of green. Is that changing? No, it's not, because my bad. We haven't put those values in here yet. So we'll do the same thing here. This will be green. And this will be blue. Okay, so this is a bit of a long one, huh? So now if I put like a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, a little bit of green, I mean, you get our orange. And if we put a little bit of blue right around there, maybe a little bit of green, you get this nice little plum color. And so, but what I want now is a way for someone to use it. So all I'm going to do right here is put a p tag that will have this. In it. Copy. Paste that. P. There we go. So now, if you need an RGB color specifically, you can come in here. You can like, ooh, I like that really steel blue. Maybe I need it a bit lighter. Then you can, and then bring it down, maybe a little kind of a tealish blue. Now you can just grab this. This is an RGB color, and if you plug that into your application anywhere, you'll get that exact same color. So that's pretty cool, and you can see that those values are changing as I'm moving it. See, the top is 255, the bottom is 0. And there we go. We have our RGB sliders. All right. Whew, that was a fun time. We got all of these in just about an hour of work. That was good times. All right, you can see my Twitter handle down there. Tweet at me if you want this code, and I will send it right over to you. If you built it along with me, awesome. But thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Peace.